All right, we should be up and running now. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to try to keep track of everybody who's with us, but I would ask you, just so we don't get a lot of feedback, to mute yourselves until you're ready to join in. And I do want to encourage you to interrupt. Just unmute and say, "Hey, Dan, I've got a question," because I can't. The way I've got the images set up, I just have four of you in. Well, you can see what I have, I think, if you're looking at the screen. So please do not hesitate to ask questions, especially since we're getting into the real nitty gritty of the book of Revelation right now. I wanted to kind of back up a little bit just to remind you where we've been. We are in chapters 4 and 5 of the book of Revelation, and that corresponds to chapter I'm sorry. I want to make sure I'm giving you the right chapters. Chapter 3 in our book by Craig Kester, which I hope you're finding helpful. It's a short introduction to Revelation. That's why I used it. But there are other commentaries out there. I think, Mac, you're reading some extra books on this, and I'm reading some others as well, and trying to supplement Kester. Not that he needs to be supplemented, but trying to supplement Kester as best as possible. You'll remember the first sections of Revelation are the first 3 chapters where John is writing letters to the churches, letters in which Christ has particular messages to them. Some of them messages of encouragement, always messages of encouragement, but also some messages of admonition, things that they could be doing better. And now, there's a transition that takes place in chapter 5. John is actually shown a door into heaven, and he's called up into heaven. And there he's presented with this vision. An ancient of days, you might say, on the throne, surrounded by 4 celestial beings, which we've talked about, that later come to be representatives of the 4 Gospels. The 7 spirits of God, the lamps around the throne, and then the 24 elders. The 24 elders, who are not angels, they're actually human beings, and they're wearing golden crowns, and they are worshiping God. And it's this continuous worship in the heavens that's happening. And I think I mentioned last time, this is the source of, a lot of our hymns. For example, Holy, 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 casting, all the saints adore thee, casting down their golden crowns around the glassy sea. Crown him with many crowns, the same imagery there. And hopefully, these are songs that we sing often in the Presbyterian church. But hopefully you will recall this the next time we sing this. We do Holy, Holy, Holy a lot in May during the baccalaureate, which is always a highlight of my being at Hastings College. And I'm sorry that we were unable to do it last year, but hopefully this year, with a under our skin, we will be able to do just that. So I think Judy Sandine just joined us. That's the name that I saw, but anyway. There's Judy.
Hello.
Judy, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah. We are in the book of Revelation. We're in chapter 5 right now. And let's remember what we just said, the king on his throne, and actually it's not an image of a man. It is just light. It's the best that John could do is give an image of God that is like that of certain jewels. So we don't have this human image, but there's kind of a break in the action, we might say. And this is where chapter 5 opens up. And as usual, I haven't opened up the book of Revelation to where it needs to be. So let's read that. Judy, can I ask you to mute your phone just so we don't get a little feedback? Thank you. Okay, here's John speaking. Then I saw in the right hand of the one seated on the throne a scroll written on the inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep bitterly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders a lamb standing as if it had been slaughtered, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He went and he took the scroll from the right hand of the one who was seated on the throne. When he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sing a new song. "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slaughtered, and by your blood you ransomed for God saints from every tribe, language, and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests serving our God, and they will reign on earth." And that's where I'm going to stop for today, because I don't know if we will even get through that in the next 3 weeks or so, because there's a lot in that. But so the scroll. So, I like to liken this, and probably sacrilegiously, to a concert. A lot of music going on, a lot of hymn singing, and we've seen the opening act. The opening band has played their music. There's been a lot of fanfare around that, and now there's a break in the action, right? And out onto the stage comes this golden microphone, and the scroll is like the microphone. The scroll is how God's plan for judgment of the earth is going to be revealed. But the crowd is waiting, and the microphone is sitting there empty, right? And the opening act, I mean, the main event, the main person isn't showing up. And people are starting to say, in this vision, hey, is the main act going to be here? Or maybe there isn't an act. Maybe nobody is even worthy to sing from this golden microphone. And this is what John is experiencing. He's got this image that, finally, after going through all of this visionary experience, he's getting to the main event. And here's the scroll. It's sealed with 7 seals, but there's no one to open it. And so this image of the scroll is really important, because for those of you who are joining us late into the action, the scroll or the revelation that John is having has its precedence in a lot of the Old Testament prophets. And the one that seems to be the most prominent, well, there are probably 2, Ezekiel and Isaiah. And you might know from Ezekiel, he has this incredible image or he has this vision from God. Now, Ezekiel was a prophet writing right around the time of the Babylonian captivity, which would have been around 587 before the Common Era. And Ezekiel has been brought away from Jerusalem, and he's being held as a refugee, really, in present-day Baghdad, or close to Baghdad, at that time referred to as Babylon. Ezekiel was a priest. He had a very high reverence for the temple. And so a lot of the temple imagery comes through in his prophecy. In fact, he's got several chapters towards the end of his prophecy, which is dedicated to the vision of a rebuilt temple. But Ezekiel, at the beginning of his prophecy, has this image, and it's this incredible image of a light and these four creatures that have wheels around within wheels, and it really hard to discern what's going on. But eventually, he is given a task by God to speak to the people of Israel who are in despair because they've been removed from Jerusalem. And then this incredible imagery that we have of God asking Ezekiel to speak to the people. But, in order to do that, if you're going to be the mouthpiece of God, you have to be worthy to do that. And there are various ways that the prophets become worthy. And this is what John in the book of Revelation is referring to. We've got the scroll, we've got the judgment that is that everyone's waiting to hear, but who can actually open this? Who can actually, sing the new song, so to speak? Well, let's hear what Ezekiel does, because this is great imagery. But you, mortal, God says to Ezekiel, hear what I say to you. Do not be rebellious like the rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I give you. I looked, and a hand was stretched out to me, and a written scroll was in it. He spread it out before me. It had writing on the front and on the back. We've just seen that in the book of Revelation, right? In other words, abundant in terms of the revelation that God is giving. It had writing on the front and on the back, and written on it were words of lamentation and mourning and woe. And he said to me, O mortal, eat what is offered to you. Eat this scroll. Go speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. He said, mortal, eat this scroll I give you, and fill your stomach with it. Then I ate it. And in my mouth, it was as sweet as honey. This is clearly what John has in mind as he is writing his vision or experiencing his vision. Ezekiel's experience of God 600 years prior to John's revelation is certainly in his mind. And, the scroll is presented. The scroll is really important. It's written on the front and back. And usually in the ancient Near East, you would write just on one side of a scroll, because what was in the scroll, especially if it was sealed, you didn't want people to read. But this scroll is abundant in terms of its revelation, God revealing what is about to happen in the world. So it is written on the front and the back. God is obviously a parsimonious God, not wanting to waste paper or vellum or whatever it's written on. So he writes on the front and back, as any good sustainable God would. There's another image here that's very important, and that's, when John is asking who is worthy to open the scroll, he's really recalling a scene from Isaiah as well. And this is in Isaiah chapter 6. And I won't read it to you, but Isaiah has a similar image of God in the temple again, though it's not clear in the book of Revelation. When John is having his image, or when John is having his revelation, it's understood that it's happening in the so-called throne room of God, that it is like a revelation in the temple, just like Isaiah's revelation and just like Ezekiel's revelation. And so Isaiah comes before God, and he has this vision, and he realizes that, this is the Holy One of Israel. And he asks, how can I possibly do what I need to do? How can I be, worthy to be your prophet? So I'll read just a little bit of this. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. This is a song that he's hearing in the temple. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, woe is me, I'm lost, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. I've seen God, but I'm so unworthy of this. Then one of the seraphs, this is one of the celestial beings, flew to me holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And whom will go before me? And who will go before us? And I said, here I am, send me. He said, go and say to the people, and then he gives this revelation. So all of this, John very clearly wants to place his experience in this context as well. Now, this scroll with the 7 seals, this is another image that's recurring and from the Old Testament, as we've seen. But it's at this point that I will stop to see if there are any questions. And then I want Mac to answer Denny's question. And Denny, if you'll ask the question again, and then have Mac respond, that'd be great. But first, are there any questions about what I've just mentioned here? My emphasis is to try to place this in its Old Testament or Hebrew context, because John is not setting that aside in any way. Now, Denny, would you ask Mac, sorry to be such a director here, but would you ask Mac your question?
Sure. Mac, it seems to me that very few Christians today have any concept of the continued importance of the seal, the notion of the seal in so many legal documents that are very, very important in the modern era as well as the past 2,000 years.
Okay. Well, I'll talk a little bit about seals, and fortunately we have another lawyer on the panel, so if I screw up, Lynn can correct me. But I see seals, 3 different meanings for the terms sealed, and that's kind of why it's confusing. The first, and I think that that's probably the one that applies here, is a seal was just a fastener, essentially. That's where the term sealing wax came from. Back in the old days, before you could lick your envelopes and they had that type of adhesive, you sealed your envelopes with sealing wax. And then you had a little device that you would punch down on the wax, and sometimes that device would leave a mark. It had a pattern to it, and so it could, in some senses, almost act as a return address. The second type of seal is the one that you're talking about, Denny. I think a legal seal, and that just goes back. It was usually in the form of, like we'd call it today, a stamp, and that's what we use today. And any document that was official had the seal of the royalty or the magistrate or whoever. And that has persisted traditionally down to today, in that anytime you'd file a document, like just as an example that I'm aware of, Hall County Court, it's going to get filed, but there's going to be a seal on it. It's just going to basically be a stamp that says Hall County Court, and it's a little round circular thing, and it's particular to Hall County, and it's more or less just a tradition. It hasn't anymore, really, Denny, the legal significance it used to have. I mean, I had one in my drawer right down here in front of me, a seal of the county court, for when they would bring out like affidavits for arrest warrants and that sort of thing, and I would seal it. But if I couldn't find it or it was out of ink, it didn't really matter. I think the courts have pretty much decided that you don't need those seals now. You can't appeal something because the document's not sealed. Now, I can think of one recent exception where that would still have been important, and that was there was a period of time, and I don't know if it still is or not. Somebody probably has more recent experience than I do. Where to have a valid birth certificate, you had to have what was a raised seal, which is the kind of one you put in the device that would put the paper between it, and it would be like embossed or whatever the term is.
Yeah.
So that's what is done in courts, but it's more of a tradition than a requirement anymore. The third one that I think confuses some people and that we heard about, and you brought this up earlier, Denny, is that in the news yesterday, we heard that some documents were taken away. They were unsealed by the court. And this has to do with the supposed bribery scandal thing that's going on now. And so those documents were, quote, unsealed. That's a completely different use of the term seal. That term seal is more like a canning jar. It means that it's confidential. And you seal that record, which means the public can't have access to it. And it's very common in like affidavits for search warrants, because you don't want the defendants to go in there and figure out what's going on before law enforcement does things. I've seen it in cases where you don't want to expose somebody's deep financial details if there are competitive issues and that sort of thing. So that's a different kind of seal that we're talking about. So I hope that wasn't too long and too boring, but that's basically what it is. And I think in our case, Dan, that we're talking about the seal that is the fastener.
Right.
And somewhere I saw, I think they made a reference to, it could be wax, it could be clay, whatever it was it took to adhere that scroll together so it wouldn't. Okay.
But
hope that answers the question.
No, that's great. And because that leads right into what I wanted to talk about, and that is, scrolls that were sealed like this could only be opened by the person to whom they would have been sent, right? And it would sometimes have the stamp of, well, we've seen in the Middle Ages, kings used to put wax on documents and then seal it with their ring. This is sealed 7 times, which, is just simply an allusion to the perfection, the universal nature of this scroll. But there's kind of an anticlimax in this whole vision, because here's John, he's ready for the main event, and it doesn't appear that anyone's going to be able to open this scroll until finally he is assured by an angel. And this angel shows up in Revelation, I think 4 different times. Don't worry, everything's fine, he says. The lion from the tribe of Judah, the root of Jesse. And what he means by that, the shoot coming out from the stump of Jesse. It's still having the reference here to the king, the monarch who was the righteous king, who, as tradition held, would be from the tribe of Judah and from the clan of, or the family of Jesse. And from this point on, I mean, it was always understood that the king would be from Judah. And I don't think many people know what that reference is, but it's in Genesis chapter 49, where there is a description of the 12 tribes, and Judah is described as a lion. Judah is a lion's whelp. He crouches down, he stretches out like a lion. And here's the point that's important. The scepter, the king's scepter, shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and the obedience of the peoples is his. So this is a type of early prophecy as well. But the understanding is that the king, at least in the southern kingdom of Israel, or of Judah, I should call it, at one point, after King David and King Solomon, the 12 tribes break into 10 tribes in the north and 2 in the south. And it's the 2 in the south, Judah, I think it's Benjamin is the other one. I may be wrong on that. Can't remember. Judah is seen to be, the tribe that is going to give rise to all of the kings. And so the king will always be from the tribe of Judah. So this reference to the Lion of Judah here is one that is going to be attributed later to Christ as well. You might remember that when we were talking about the four creatures, one of them has the face of a lion, and that was attributed to the Gospel of Mark because Christ is referred to or celebrated there or recognized there as the Lion of Judah. But it's this lion who very quickly is transformed into a lamb, or we're not even told that the lion actually shows up, but that is a kind of a metaphorical reference. But the lion is a lamb, which carries with it all kinds of great paradoxical meaning. And I just thought I would stop there and see if anybody wanted to reflect a little bit on that. Just let me reread that again. I'm moving too far back and forth in my Bible here. Then I saw between the throne and the living creatures and among the elders a lamb standing as if it had been slaughtered, having 7 horns and 7 eyes. Well, just prior to that, when John feels that the scroll is not going to be open, he begins to weep. And then one of the elders says, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scrolls and its 7 seals." So the lion and the lamb. Go ahead, Will. You got your finger pointing.
Yeah, I know you'll see that. Well, I've been wanting to ask, Darrell Lloyd and Dwight Marsh, decades ago at First Pres in Fellowship Hall, read William Blake. And one of the poems was, I think, titled The Lion and the Lamb. And I would like to know if this that you're talking about is where Blake gets the
Absolutely.
metaphor.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I did not know that. And I love the poetry.
Yeah, I think Blake actually, he was an illustrator as well, and he illustrates a lot of the New Testament as well as the whole, the creation story in the Old Testament, and I think several scenes from the book of Revelation as well. Had I remembered or had I known that, I would have had Dwight say something a little bit about the lion and the lamb. Dwight, do you want to jump in there?
I don't recall the episode, but Blake does play with that image through his poems, and I think I can quote the one about the lamb. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee light, etc., etc. But I'm a little vague on the lion image now.
And not to mention tiger, burning bright,
Tiger.
in the forest of the night.
Yes.
Good job.
What
Yeah.
immortal hand or I dare afraid, fearful.
Like fearful symmetry. Yeah, and Blake was aware of that terrible paradox. I don't want to call it terrible paradox, that great paradox that, that the God who can be represented as lion can also be represented as lamb. This is what C.S. Lewis brings out so well in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I remember Bill Nottage Tacey, one of his favorite quotes was from that book where I think it's Lucy who asked, well, is he dangerous, and he said, and the lion, of course, is very dangerous, but he's also very gentle. That great paradox that we see in the inner life of God as well, in the inner life of the Trinity, represented as both lion and lamb. But here, the real focus is going to be on the lamb. And I wanted to point out something in this text that may seem incidental, but maybe when you read it, I wondered if it gave you pause. It's in verse 6. Then I saw between the throne and the four living creatures and among the elders a lamb standing as one, as if it had been slaughtered. Other texts will say, who seemed to have been slain. The Greek word is dakeo, meaning to seem or to appear. Now, I'm fairly certain John wants to emphasize here the fact that, this is, when we say slaughtered, we mean sacrificed. But this unfortunate use of the word seemed, was he really slaughtered? This gave rise in the early church to a kind of a controversy, a heresy called Docetism, from that Greek, dakeo. And this was the notion that if God is perfect, and this is where Greek philosophy thrown into the Hebrew tradition just messes everything up. If God is perfect and perfection does not allow for change, then God could not have possibly suffered, because suffering involves all kinds of, human qualities. So when Christ was on the cross, if he was truly God, he only appeared to be human. He only appeared to suffer. He could not have truly suffered, right? And I can't say for certain, but I'm sure that one of the texts that would have been used for this would have been this text from John. He's a lamb who seemed, he appears to have been slaughtered, but truly wasn't slaughtered. Well, this was seen as heresy, of course, because it undermines the whole enormity of the incarnation and the suffering of Christ unto death on the cross. It only seemed that Christ died on the cross. Well, these early Docetists were trying to maintain the sovereignty of God and the utter otherness of God at the expense of the human quality of the divine Christ. And so they were quite a force for quite some time, and you can read about them among the early church fathers. But this is one of the things that the creeds wanted to emphasize about Christ. Suffered and died on the cross. Did not seem to suffer, did not seem to die on the cross. So just wondered if anybody wanted to mention anything about that. I can't see everybody, so if Will is raising a finger, I can't see you, Will. Okay, good. Well, this lamb sure is an interesting creature, because he has 7 horns and 7 eyes. This is also kind of reminiscent of a vision that Daniel had of a ram that had one horn, and then it grew into 3 horns. But here the number 7. I mean, we don't want to take this too literally. The number 7 again represents the universality. 7 being the perfect number in Christianity, but also many other world religions. The 4 directions and the zenith and the apex, or the apex, and then the highest and the lowest and the center, and it places, north, south, east, west, above, below, center, gives us a kind of a geographical sense of perfection. And so the number 7 here, John is going to use over and over again, but this simply just to say that Jesus, Christ's view of the world, is able to see all things happening in the world. Of course, this is connected with the 7 spirits of God. And I want to remind you that, those 7 spiritual virtues are taken from Isaiah 11 once again. But here's the point that I hope we'll have some time to talk a little bit about today, because this is something that I don't think many Christians really quite get. And I'm not trying to be condescending about this. I'm trying to I guess I'm trying to state what I think is a lack of good Christian education in our churches today. People say, you know, Jesus died for me. He shed his blood on the cross for me, and this is what's represented here in this Ghent altarpiece. You know, another common image. Here's the lamb, you know, and by the way, this is the new and improved lamb, the one that was recently changed with the face that looks like a human being. And then from the heart of the lamb, the blood going into the chalice of the Eucharist, you know. But when people say, you know, Christ died on the cross and he shed his blood for me to forgive me of my sins, it's become kind of a mantra that if you really ask them to expand on, you know, what is presumed in all of that, they will find that they quickly get into you know, some deep water, some tangled reasoning. And the reason for that is that for the last 2,000 years, theories of atonement have gotten into tangled reasoning. And there's not been one clear theory of atonement that, you know, seems to cover all the bases here. So when the Lamb is revealed, the elders, they offer their incense, their prayers up, which are the prayers of the saints, and then they offer a new song. This is reminiscent of the Psalms. Sing a new song to God. Sing unto the Lord a new song. When something new breaks onto the scene, when something is miraculously achieved or can be attributed to the hand of God, in the Hebrew tradition, a new song, a new hymn would be sung to that, or would be created. And this is the case here. There is something new that's on the scene, and you know, we're going to introduce this new song from our latest album, going back to the you know, the image of the rock concert, right? But here's what the song says: "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slaughtered, and by your blood you ransomed for God saints from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests, serving our God, and they will reign on earth." There are a couple of things here. First of all, it's interesting that John does, you know, recognize the fact that the slain lamb has opened the door, to use that image that we've seen already, especially in chapter 3, to open the door, not to just Jews, but to the Gentiles, to the nations themselves. Then something we'll get to later, it's not a kingdom of priests. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it's a kingdom and priests. Very interesting. But the point I really want to probably talk about for the next 20 minutes is this idea that Jesus' blood shed on the cross ransomed for God saints from every tribe and language and people and nation. What exactly does that mean? How is it that a man who is divine shedding blood on the cross, you know, effects this transformation and this redemption of the entire world? And this is the place where people will get into a kind of, you know, tangled web of statements, you know, that if they follow the logical conclusions, they'll end up kind of scratching their head. So I'd like to talk about some theories of atonement that have been presented over the last 2,000 years. And first among those really focuses on this idea of ransom, that, you know, if you follow the epic narrative of the Hebrew Bible and of the New Testament, and especially in the letters of Paul, human beings, their wills bound in sin, are incapable of achieving any type of reconciliation with God, because their will is bound. Their will cannot bring about the act of reconciliation. So it's incumbent then upon, not incumbent, but it is necessary then, if there's redemption that's going to happen in the world, the initiative has to be taken by God. So far, we're all good, right? Spilling of the blood. Now, when we talk about a ransom, when do you usually hear the word ransom used? Somebody being held captive, you know, a ransom is being required by the captors, and it has to be paid before they are going to be released. And that's how it's being used here as well. The idea is that Satan, remember, Satan's going to be playing a big role here pretty soon. He's going to be introduced onto the scene, I think, in the next chapter. It's already been alluded to. But Satan has somehow wrested from God control of the human race. And in order for God to be, in order for there to be some reconciliation between humans and God, something needs to be paid to Satan in order to release Christians from this bondage. Well, that all sounds well and good, except for the fact that you've just admitted that the God who is sovereign over all has to owe or give something to Satan. That the only way that this can be affected, if like God is obligated by some sort of universal code that Satan has won these folks fair and square, you know, and God has to play by Satan's rules. Okay, I'll pay the ransom of a perfect man's blood, and now they can be released. That was one of the early theories of atonement in the church. When people started to ask these questions, well, how is it that a guy dying on the cross, you know, reconciles the world? So I want to stop there and see if there's any consternation among all of you well-educated people.
Dan,
Oh,
you know,
I was hoping I would hear from Jane. Great.
okay. Years ago, Jim Van Hoven, he was our minister, he was talking about the theory of atonement. And he said what this reflects about God. He said, the God is so perfect, he just can't stand anybody who is imperfect. And then he said, would you have a friend like that? Would you like to marry somebody like that? You know, it just says, it just is such the antithesis of how we feel about God.
Right. Yeah. And this again is where Greek philosophical ideas about what is necessary for a perfect, if God is perfect, then he is the greatest of all, greater that than which nothing greater can be conceived, that than which nothing more perfect can be conceived. If God is perfect, then God cannot change. And so, you know, that means God can't love, because love involves a lot of change. I don't know if you guys ever experienced that or not. God can't suffer, all of those things. That's not the God that we see in the Hebrew Bible. But this is the God that was created, I would say, by the early church fathers when they were trying to answer, when they were trying to give an apology, being apologists, to some of the Greco-Roman philosophers who were kind of making fun of them, right? And they painted themselves into this corner. But here, you know, this doesn't even appear to be something we would want to say of God. Do we want to worship a God who's beholden to Satan? Who, you know...
Milton avoids that by God saying that he's the creator of justice, and if there isn't a penalty paid, then justice fails. And it's in a monologue that God gives, speaking to Jesus. Yeah. And when Jesus volunteers to pay that, he does that in heaven before he's ever born.
that raises another philosophical question, though. Is God beholden to a metaphysical principle so much that principle can't be changed? This is something that I think Plato talked about in the Phaedrus, you know. Are there principles that are so established in the structure of the universe that even God cannot set them aside on occasion? You know, if so, then why don't we pay more attention to those principles than we do to the gods? Because if the gods are beholden to those principles, then the principles are really the ones who are the gods. That essentially is what Milton is saying. Justice demands that God do this. God is beholden to some principle that's higher than God's self. We're getting into a logical set of contradictions here. We really are. Anybody else want to say anything? I can't see everybody. So let me move on to the next atonement theory that's connected with this in some way. Okay, well, God doesn't owe Satan anything, but we can say that human beings are bound by Satan, held captive by him, and they must be released from from his clutches. They must be released from the death that he represents. So another theory of atonement was proposed, and that is that God was going to trick Satan. He was going to create Christ, who was a perfect man, and he was going to enflesh him, and so that Satan didn't know that he was actually divine. And so here is a perfect man, Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, who bears all the qualities of Adam, right? This is another Adam. Oh my gosh, Satan can't possibly, Satan can't possibly pass this up. He's got to have this. He's got to foil God once again, right? So he basically effects the crucifixion of Christ so that Christ can be taken down into Hades. And thereupon, this is where Christ reveals himself as not a human being who's perfect, but also God, and binds Satan, and then removes from Hades all of the saints that had gone before. And this is the so-called harrowing of hell. I've shown you pictures of that in the past. Well, that seems to be a pretty cool theory, right? Except for the fact that redemption is brought about through deception. God has to resort to the means of Satan in order to redeem the world. So that creates problems as well. But what wonderful imagery, and this was an atonement theory that was important throughout the Middle Ages, of Christ breaking the chains of Hades, of breaking down the door of Hades, binding Satan, and then, now the world is redeemed. Well, this all works well and good, but if Satan is bound, why does evil still prevail in the world? It doesn't cover all the bases. And the main one was that, Christ is kind of used as bait. The human man, Jesus, who has kind of like the fishing hook of divinity in him, so that, Satan, who is often seen as, this large fish anyway, chomps at the bait and is brought out, by the hook itself. And this is how redemption is wrought into the world. That one doesn't work very well at all. Along the line, in the 12th century, a man named Anselm comes along and says that in order for, if God has been offended if God's dignity and God's honor and God's holiness have been so offended by the fall of Adam and thus the rest of humanity, then just like a medieval king must, if you are offending that king, you must give some sort of restitution. You must, the honor that you have taken away by the offense must be somehow given back to the king. Well, that was impossible. That's impossible for that to happen, because what needs to be given back to the king would be a sinless man. That's what was taken away, right? So in order for that to happen, Christ is that sacrifice, that perfect sacrifice that's given back to God in order for the world to, achieve this balance once again. This is known as the substitution theory. Christ acts as a substitute for human beings who are incapable of giving God what is required in order for God's honor to be somehow redeemed. And that is still a very important theory for the Roman Catholic Church still today. It's a theory that a man named Saint Anselm proposed. But there's another one that has less to do with giving back or restoring to God God's honor, something that we have to give to God, right? That's what the substitution, God needs this, right? He needs to have his honor restored. Well, then we get into the problem of God needing something. If God is the most perfect of all beings, then God lacks nothing. Then why does God need something in order for redemption to happen into the world? Do you see what a tangled mess theology tends to be? Well, the moral influence theory, and I'll pick up next time, talk about penal substitution, because that's the one that, unfortunately, for me, in my opinion, it comes out of the Princeton school of, the Presbyterian school of the 19th century. But the moral influence of Abelard is one that kind of turns the tables, reverses the tables. Instead of human beings giving something to God, the crucifixion is about God giving something to human beings. And this is what is so beautifully my favorite passage in all of Paul's letters, this hymn in Philippians. Let your mind be that of Christ, who did not count equality with God as something to be grasped or something to be used to his own purposes, but emptied himself and took on the form of a slave and suffered on the cross unto death. This demonstrates the love that God has for the world, that God will do the one thing that technically God as a God cannot do. Take unto himself death, even a heinous death on the cross. And therefore, it offers this wonderful paradox of the God of love who will empty himself to such an extent that he becomes ungod. He dies, but then obviously is resurrected, so that at the name of Christ, every knee shall bend and every head shall bow. This is known as the moral influence theory, and it's the one that I personally feel is the most beautiful. That's the word I'm going to give. Beautiful. If God is willing to do this for humanity, then should this not be a model for humanity who wants to achieve, its highest potential? This is a moral influence. Christ influences us to be morally upright in this way. It has nothing to do with sacrifices. It has nothing to do with God needing blood from the lamb. But it's going to be a while before that moral influence theory comes along, 1,000 years down the line. Up until this point, it's going to be this, that somehow the blood of the Lamb, and here we see the blood being, emptied into the chalice, is required, necessary, so that human beings are ransomed. Not just the Jews, but all human beings are ransomed. It doesn't say anything here about from whom, but I guess it can be assumed ransomed from Satan. So we've got a few minutes yet. I've talked a lot. What kind of questions or comments do you have about this?
Well, I think your comment is the most comforting. Your way of looking at atonement. I think that to me is more comforting than all those others.
Right. Well, it's Abelard's way. There's another one.
But it's Dan Deffenbaugh's way.
Well, there's another atonement theory that I want to present next week as well. And this is from a man named Rene Girard, which is also very compelling as well. Anyone else? Mac,
I would just want to emphasize again, and which I've brought up before, not to lose track of how Jewish this is. This idea of the blood of the Lamb is basically Passover.
Yeah.
Where the lamb has been sacrificed.
Yeah.
And the Lord passed over the houses of the people of Israel. The Egyptians were all destroyed, but the Jews received life.
Yeah.
Based on the lamb, the blood on the lintel, and all of that.
Yeah, right.
Again, that's, so, a Jew reading this is going to go, sure.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, Mac, that is my next, well, I thought I had that slide in here. Yeah, that is the slide that I wanted to emphasize next, is this, the lamb is a biblical symbol, and where we see it throughout the Hebrew Bible and even into the New Testament and even into 1 Peter, it runs like a red thread through the narrative itself. So thank you for introducing what we're going to talk about next week. That's great. I will excuse you all and let you go off into your own, your own, I guess, responsibilities in the world. I look forward to this every week. I really enjoy it. And next week, I want to have Jane Marsh tell a little story about her going to movies. Speaking of committing sins, going to movies as a little girl. So
Left behind.
yeah, right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Bye now.
Okay.
Next week.
Mhm.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.